You're listening to Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim, a podcast dedicated to the private lending industry. I'm Kevin Kim, and my goal is to sit down with key figures in the private lending industry to talk about their business and their personal lives. We'll get their takes on market conditions, the industry at large, and their personal stories. Overall, I really want to learn more about how they started and grew their businesses. So whether you're a lender, a borrower, a vendor, an investor, or anyone just interested in learning more about private lending, this podcast is definitely for you. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's episode of Lender Lounge with Kevin Kim. Before we move on, I wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about Baranowski, the nation's largest law firm dedicated to the private lending industry. We have 3 legal departments vertically integrated to serve a private lender's business. We handle everything from licensing to new entity formation, fund formation, loan documents, national compliance, litigation, bankruptcy, foreclosure, and so much more. We pride ourselves on giving our clients the ultimate peace of mind. Check us out at jurasilawfirm.com. In addition, our internal conference line gives opportunities to you to network, learn from industry leaders, pitch to capital sources, and make new connections. Visit jurassicon.com for more information about our upcoming events. That's GERACICON.com. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Lender Lounge with yours truly, Kevin Kim. Today, I have the unique pleasure of interviewing my partner, Dennis Baranowski of Baranowski fame. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
So we're both wearing the Baranowski shirts.
It's the uniform.
Yep, actually it is, because we actually, half the firm is wearing their polo today. So first of all, before we even get started, introduce yourself to the audience and let them know who you are, what you do for the firm, that kind of stuff, and we'll go from there.
All right, my name is Dennis Baranowski. I'm a partner, and I work in the transactional or banking and finance group. I do a little bit of everything. I work on loan transactions, work with clients, advise them on compliance, whether here in California with respect to licensing or 50 state, whether or not they need a license in other states. That's
pretty much it.
Yeah, pretty much it. And anything that really, but I train the team, I assist them and guide everyone on with respect to more complex transactions. Right. How to navigate.
But you're also on both sides of the industry, if you will. You're not just on the resi side. You're doing resi, commercial. You're doing all of it, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And what's interesting though, Dennis, is I know this, but for our audience's sake, you joined Baranowski not to do loan documents and compliance and transactional support. It was not closing docs at all, right? When you first joined us back in, when was it again? It was 13, 12?
2012. Yeah, it was 9 years.
Back at the
June.
9 years now.
Yeah.
Holy! Back at the the Main Street office, or was it? No, was it Main Street office?
No, it was on.
We were in the building next to the airport.
Yeah.
And we had that
Martin,
and we had that pit of cubicles. It was awful. I remember sitting across from you, and then Nima had his own office. I was so angry about that.
Yeah, it just wasn't right.
But back then, when you first joined us back in 12. It was bankruptcy, right?
No, actually, I did.
Litigation?
I did join. I did join to join the banking and finance group. I did. The intent was transactional, but funny enough, a lot of it was residential compliance a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'd written some articles and did some work with respect to Dodd-Frank. Had just, it was at the inception of
we were all
when
really
all that happened.
Yep.
Yeah. But then kind of shifted more towards commercial and just fix and flip, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. It just happened to be I had a background with bankruptcy and litigation. Funny enough, one of the first things, probably within the first month of me at the firm, I did a trial with Christine and Gerasi.
Right.
And that wasn't out of me having mad litigation skills. It was more a matter of we needed a live body to actually handle and assist with the trial.
Well, we were a different law firm back then, right? We were I think it was 5 attorneys back then when you first started, 4 attorneys?
Was it? Yeah, it was Nima, Amy, myself, the Gerasis, who, even at that point,
right?
We can edit this out. But whether or not they were practicing at that point, we'll leave that for debate. And then we had Sabina, who was kind of a
right, Sabina.
It was more part time, but yeah, we were a really small firm at that point in time.
Right, and we were kind of doing a little bit of everything. And I remember when I joined 2 years after you joined, it was still very, very small, but we started to see kind of the industry started taking shape, right? And so I kind of want to talk about like, before, okay, let's talk about before Drossy, before we get into actual, 14, 15, 16, when the market started really taking shape. I want to talk to you about, before, because you've been practicing law for how many years now?
Oh, God. Do I have to say it?
You have to say it.
22. Or 20, actually 23. I was
we call him the beard for a reason, right? We call him the beard, the wise one for a reason. But like you've been here now with us 9 years. So before that, what were you doing before you came to Drossy?
So before that, I primarily most of the time I had my own shop. I had my own practice for I would say, gosh, probably 7 years or so. And then I'd gone in-house for a mortgage lender. And that's funny enough how I met Anthony.
Okay.
When he was just a young baby
Pre-crash?
lawyer. Pre-crash, yeah. It was actually, it was right before the crash. And he was still working at his prior employment, but he was the fund's securities attorney. So whenever we needed any type of advice or had any amendments that we needed to the fund or anything, I wouldn't touch it.
Right.
And so I would give Anthony a call. And
that's proof that Anthony Drossy actually used to practice law. It's a joke we have in the office. He's not running our litigation team, but he can do a little bit of everything. But he taught me everything I know about funds. So shout out to Anthony. So you were running your own show. So how was that like? I mean, it was just you and you have your own office somewhere in Orange County?
No, actually, I was in the IE, Inland Empire.
So Inland Empire. Was it mostly still kind of like in the mortgage space, or was it kind of a little bit of everything? Because a lot of solo, it's like I had my own office for a couple of years, and it's just you do whatever pays the rent,
Yeah. So when I first started out, it was whatever came in the door,
right?
And it was I did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. As the market, that area, for those of you who are not familiar with the Inland Empire and here in Southern California, during the real estate boom, that area just went nuts because they had wide open spaces to build. So there were all brand new homes coming up. Equity in even the older homes was just shooting up at just unbelievable pace. And everybody's kind of looking at it going like, how long is this really going to last?
Right.
But funny enough, everyone just kept on taking money out of their properties, buying RVs, boats, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But as a result, there was just a booming market there in the Inland Empire. And so when that started, I went to high school in that area. I went to Upland High School, and I knew a lot of people. I just that was my hood. That was where. So and a lot of people I knew were in real estate related industries. So I had broker clients, I had lender clients, I had realtor clients, contractors, carpet stores.
So you're all over the place, and you're dealing with the lenders, the builders, the vendors. Yeah. But it still sounds like it's kind of tied to real estate though, because it was part of the boom, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like translate that experience, and then you went in house at a mortgage shop.
Yeah.
And so having that more broader base, you were general counsel.
Yes, yeah.
So they had you do a little bit of everything, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
So they had to deal with a foreclosure. You're dealing with it. They had to deal with a vendor's dispute, mechanics lien, anything. You're dealing with bankruptcy,
yeah, employment issues.
Oh wow,
yeah, you name it. TCPA
lawsuits,
yeah.
And so let me ask you this: so like when you're doing that, like, and now because what we do as a law firm, we have set departments, and your role and your area of expertise is so specialized now. How, do you miss it? I mean, having a little bit of broader kind of scope?
Yeah, in the sense that if I had unlimited amounts of time, I absolutely miss it. There was a real challenge.
That's a good way to put it. If I had as much time as possible, right?
Yeah, I absolutely I enjoyed the challenge. I loved looking at and figuring out new areas of law or new types of agreements. Back when I was on my own, I learned, I kind of trained myself on how to write contracts using Google. And Fine Law, I don't know if you remember Fine Law.
Oh, I love Fine Law. I mean, who needs Westlaw and Nexus when you got Google? For solo practitioners, I mean, Westlaw costs a fortune. So, I mean, I remember basically Google, Fine Law, 1CLE, those were the resource, So, yeah, you got to do what you got to do, so...
Yeah. But the kind of circling back to how it impacts being back here, and I enjoy it's a lot less. There's a little bit less stress because when you're when you're in charge of your own destiny, I really didn't have a ton of people that I could bounce certain things off of. I had mentors on the litigation side and in bankruptcy, but not so much on the transactional and real estate side. So I was really figuring everything out on the fly on my own.
But did you have transactional experience before that? So you got a law school, you worked at a law firm, I'm guessing, in between.
Yeah.
But were you doing litigation there?
Actually, no. It was the real estate. It was the real estate litigation group. But we also did. It was real estate and business, I suppose.
Okay, so you've been doing transactional your whole career. Okay, okay. Yeah. So you had your own shop. You go in house, and then you come over here. But the transition to Gerasi. Like, it's kind of funny. A lot of us early Gerasi-ites, if you can call it, like have really, really funny stories of joining the firm. Like I joined via Craigslist. I literally saw an ad on Craigslist for a contract attorney, and I was running my own shop. And I needed the work, and I got a job here. How are you? I mean, how did that end up? How did you join the firm?
Well, as I mentioned, I knew Anthony from way back when, and then actually my wife Cameo, one of her really close friends at the time, was sorority sisters with Christina.
Okay.
And so I would see Christina and Anthony at, just different get-togethers and parties. Right. And Cameo, ended up, just my wife is quite personable and makes friends with everybody. So she ended up getting, at the time, talking quite a bit with Christina. And they just were like, yeah, he should consider coming over and working with us. And at the time, my practice was doing well, and I was like, I like being able to work on my own. I was being able to set my own hours.
This is post crash too, right? This is you're
doing
this
okay. Was this. It's kind of started off like right at the beginning, post crash, I should say,
because 09.
Yeah. And at the time, things were going great, and unfortunately, I should have I guess hindsight, looking at it, going and not, I've never experienced anything like this with the business and having the crash and the ups and downs. But my business actually transitioned quite a bit to bankruptcy, and so a lot of my clients, I was helping them, get out.
So that's how you became the bankruptcy guy, because you had that practical experience based on need.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You got to hustle, put the food on the table for the family.
Figure it out. Right. And that and I want to come back to that in a bit about like your role today, about training and how you can use that. But before we get there, I still want to kind of like. Okay, so you joined the firm at a very interesting time, because we were basically a tiny little shop, like a small law firm. And you've been with us to help us grow this place to what we are today. And we've doubled and doubled again over the past few years, not without any growing pains, mind you. But so let's talk about that. I mean, you joined the firm and you're doing all kinds of stuff. Like you're doing litigation work with Christina. You're doing some transactional work with Nima and Sabina and Anthony. Like when did the whole like idea of your current kind of like the direction where you are today? When did that cement for you?
I would say it really cemented probably when we moved into the 90 Discovery. So our building here.
So we moved here in like 14 or 15? 15? I think 15.
15.
Right? I think so.
Yeah. Before that, I think just by the nature of our firm and how our size, it was kind of okay. Well, when I was needed somewhere, I would just
figure it out.
Yeah, and because we didn't always have coverage everywhere we needed it. So
no, we didn't. I remember preparing an ad for a magazine. Like, I'm an attorney, guys. There
was all kinds of stuff.
And I also remember having to move boxes and water bottles and assemble chairs. Yeah, I remember.
Oh yeah. Kevin was the go-to handyman for years. I
had the toolbox under my desk for a while. But okay, so when we moved to 90 here in Irvine, so we moved here in our own building here about 6-7 years ago now, and so that was when you guys really cemented this. Like, okay, Dennis is going to specifically only do this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really where it kind of set in.
That was the year, from a market standpoint, when the private lending industry really started to cement. Right, we started to seeing some significant growth in our clients, but also the firm. Like the year after in 2016, we doubled in size.
Yeah.
And so talk about how that played a role and how busy we were, because like it was crazy. Remember?
Yeah.
We started doing all the conferences. People all of a sudden we started talking to clients from all over the country. Like talk about that really quick.
Yeah. So it was really. I think at that time when we moved here, we all we're looking at and trying to figure out where the firm was going to go, and the industry was growing. And then there were just some opportunities that, as far as figuring out what we wanted as a firm, and what our goals were. And I think that was really for us a big turn for us was when we started going, okay, this is how we want to manage the firm, and really setting the goals and how we wanted to grow.
So I remember before that we were trying to attract like bank clients and all kinds of random, like it was a different time.
We were all over the place. And I think we figured out, okay, well, we do this well. What we do well, and nobody else can do it like we do. And as a result, and we finally, I think it dawned on us, or whatever you wanted to, however you want to put it, and we started focusing on that, and growing from that place. And I think that was really when we were able to establish what our identity was. And then I think even within the firm and the team that we had at that time, it was figuring out what everybody's identity was. And so a lot of what would happen is we have a much higher volume of the complex and crazy transactional stuff. But back then, I was really the only one that was doing that. And so
back then, every deal was kind of weird, kind of hairy, kind of custom. You started to see some standardization on some of the terms. So back then you had to be able to write any fact pattern they threw at you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think that the industry, as we became more aware of what our identity was, it made it much easier for us to convey that to other people. And then, into the industry. And when the industry saw, okay, well, Gerasi knows who they are and what they do, and I know how I want to use them. I know how I can identify with them. And I think that was a really big change and shift for us. And instead of looking at going, okay, well, we're just a service provider within the industry, I also think we looked at ourselves as more being a partner and a participant in the industry. And I think that was another big shift for us, and I think really helped us grow. And then it just happened to be at a great time of when the industry was expanding.
And was there like when I interviewed Nima and Anthony for the show, Nima had this recollection of like when we really kind of when it really sank in, like when we crystallized, it was when him and I were on stage at AAPL on a panel or something like that. But and I have my own view on it, but I want to hear your view on it. When do you feel like things crystallized for Gerasi and we really became kind of a market leader or industry leader when it comes to a role in the private lending space?
I can't. I'm trying to think of what year it was. But there was 1 month where I feel like every single phone call I was getting, and new clients and existing clients were all like, "Hey, you guys are everywhere." You guys are incredible. And it was just, we like this content you put out. We love the article. We love and there's so much feedback that was and it was positive feedback because we were focused on adding value. And I can't remember what year that was, but it was pretty early
16
on.
or 17. Because I remember it was essentially when we brought on, I think it was when Ruby joined, we really doubled down on marketing. And this is really good feedback for our listeners, like the importance of marketing. Like, we were a very talented organization. We were very nimble and we were very able to do a lot of things for our clients, but also from a customer service standpoint, I felt like this organization really had a lot of value, but the problem was no one knew it. And all of a sudden, Anthony comes back from some kind of like educational retreat and, doubles down on marketing, and we hire Ruby, and all of a sudden we start really like tripling down on content marketing, articles, webinars. I remember we were doing a webinar. We were having meetings and having, all type of content, because at the time we hadn't put out any content. So we just had a laundry list, and that was an amazing time. It was an exciting time because it was like literally, hey, we need you to go in there and do a webinar real quick. And like, how do you do a webinar? What tools are we using? It was the craziest thing. But I agree with you. I mean, I went to a conference at the end of that year. It was APL, and everyone was saying, "Hey, you guys are everywhere now. What's going on? You guys, are you guys growing?" And we had to say we were growing, but we really didn't grow. I mean,
it was all the same people at that point.
Exactly the same people. But then we started growing. We had Melissa join that year, and we had a few other people join us starting going forward. But that was kind of like the crystallizing moment. I agree. I mean, we started really getting a lot of exposure and attention, and not just locally here in California, but nationally. And I felt that when I went to AAPL, because the national show, like guys in Texas, guys in Florida were saying, "Hey guys, I've heard of you guys. I've been seeing your stuff," and that was crazy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to is what I was saying. As far as us figuring out our identity,
Who we are.
and who we are,
Right.
and then being able to find the right people to fit and
Right.
help convey that.
Well,
and
let's talk about that for you, though, right? And just like any other interview we do with any internal Jurassic member, I always make sure to contact clients and team members for questions, because while my questions may be good, the questions are almost always better. So this comes from Kyle on your team.
I'm scared.
And it's the same kind of question, though. Like, tell us about your career path as an attorney from starting out to ending up here as a partner at Jurassic. And that goes to kind of the identity, right? Like, you've had different roles, you've taken on different responsibilities here. Like, talk about that, like how you kind of built and built your career and came here, and then also went through all the iterations that we've gone through as an organization, but you've gone through as well.
Okay, absolutely, yeah. I'll try and do a little bit of an abridged version. 23 years is a long time. This is going to be the longest podcast yet.
Yeah.
No, so when I started practicing, the very first firm I worked at I was doing PI.
And we have that in common, because my first job was doing PI as well.
And that was it was the job I had when I was waiting for bar results.
Right.
I was there probably for a month or two. Actually, it was kind of funny. I left there because the partner, they had promised me a salary when I had gotten hired as a law clerk, and they said, okay, when you get hired on, we're going to give you the salary. And then the day after I got the bar results, I sat down with one of the partners, and he said, okay, here's what we're offering you. And it was like $5,000 less. Right. And at that time, it still wasn't a lot of money anyway.
Right.
And the day before, the dude just like rolled up in like a 7 Series BMW that he paid cash for.
Right.
And I'm going, what do you mean you don't have money? My salary, that's like it's less than what it costs to service your car.
That's the MO for PI attorneys, man. Yep.
Yeah. So fortunately, I got an offer with a bigger firm. They're actually a pretty well-known national firm. They focused on insurance defense, which is where I got a lot of my litigation experience. But the group that I worked with was actually a business and real estate litigation team, and we did some transactional as well. Mm-hmm. But most of what we were doing, we were working for title companies and loan servicers. Midland Loan Servicing was one of them.
Oh, nice.
And
so you started out right away doing this stuff.
Yeah, right out the door. And we were actually getting on commercial properties, we were placing receivers on the property.
Oh, nice.
And so I got a lot of early experience going to court, filing receivership actions, understanding what the whole process was at the time. And then, it was just kind of the contracts would come in, and the partner I was working with ended up training me on how to draft contracts.
Right.
And so I really enjoyed that side of it. And I enjoyed the litigation side of it, but it was really because I understood and knew what the rules were. And so I had that, you had that confine and kind of like that box you were working in. And a lot of it, even though the arguments were different, the process and the structure of it all was kind of rinse, wash, and repeat. So the partner that I was working for ended up leaving and went out on his own. And so it kind of left me as a man without a country. And in a large firm with that, there really wasn't any group that could really absorb me at the time. And so I was kind of a journeyman, and I was working with pretty much every different, I was doing construction defect litigation, public entity defense. I was doing some police officer defense. Yeah.
When you do insurance defense, all kinds of cases, man, it's crazy. Yeah.
So, but I ended up, and because I wasn't able to meet the billables because the work just wasn't there. I ended up getting, I got laid off at one point, and then that's when I opened up my own shop. And and at that point I was doing a little bit of everything. I was making appearances for attorneys I was sharing an office with, doing just small, basic little agreements. I was handling collection actions, defense.
Everything that pays the rent, right?
it was pretty much like, you know how to do this? Sure.
Yeah. But let me ask you this: how did that play into your role here? Because you were essentially, when we moved here and we started really growing, you had already been in a senior role doing a lot of the more complicated transactions. You were helping shepherd a lot of our commercial clients through a lot of their growing years. But talk about that. How did that really shape your career here at Jurassic? Because that generalist approach, you kind of have a feel, you get a better feel for things.
Yeah. I think, the background of what I did leading up to being here at Jurassic is kind of really what allows me to see the big picture and understand what the firm's doing for our client, not just for our clients, but even internally and how we're operating as a firm. Because I had just I touched upon everything, man. It was everything our firm did, with the exception of securities. I will never claim to be a securities attorney, but
don't. It's not worth it.
But I did do corporate work.
I remember.
But yeah, I think it really. I'm kind of I feel like I'm a little bit of a Swiss Army knife.
Right.
I'm able to adapt into a lot of different situations, and I think that really helped me within the firm, because as we were growing and as new things were coming up, I was able to transition and pivot into things really quickly, and without a lot. I really didn't need a lot of time to get up to speed.
Right.
When we had a need, I was able to fill it. Like when I would ran bankruptcy for a little while. It was so. On that end of it's kind of interesting. For a long time, though, I was trying to figure out my identity, and even when I was as a solo practitioner, because my identity was everything, right? It was kind of a jack of all trades. Right. And even when I went in house, it was jack of all trades. And then coming here, interestingly, it was when I started focusing on just the transactional side of it, I started kind of understanding a little bit more of, okay, what is it that I do, and where can I best contribute to the team and to the firm as a whole. But it took me a while, because for a while, I was going to conferences and look, I feel like I'm a friendly guy and I can talk to anybody, but I'm not the conference guy. And that's just, Kevin's much more likable and energetic than I am.
I just drink a lot more than you do. That's all it is. Just a raging alcoholic.
But it's really trying to figure out, and I think it's for everybody, is trying to figure out where your strengths really lie and where you're going to be able to provide the greatest value for the firm. And so it was understanding, okay, well, this is who I am and this is what I do. My adaptability, it provides a lot of value for the firm, because there really isn't much. If we had an emergency and something were to come up, I could plug in without a problem.
Right. And we've had that. I mean, we've seen it. We've had, during COVID, we had multiple crises with various, people leaving and various other crises happening. And bankruptcy was one thing, but a few other things, like we needed some support, and like someone more senior needed to kind of oversee it, and you jumped in. So
accounting.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So and that's the biggest challenge in running and operating a business, is we've had a lot of ups and downs when it comes to personnel. But because this is Kyle asking you this, and I know for a fact that you've personally trained Kyle, and you taught him a lot of things. Not only about your guys' area of practice, but also just general skills. How much of that kind of generalist or broad understanding of the law and business translates into your training?
I think it's a huge part of it, because once you can start seeing kind of the big picture of everything and looking at it holistically, there really isn't a whole lot you can't figure out.
Right.
And so, fortunately, Kyle's he's a super smart guy,
right.
Just really smart. And he's able to understand, okay, well, let me see the big picture. And you start seeing patterns and connections between things that normally you'd look at and go, really, what do these things have to do? Like a deed in lieu and, like a leasehold mortgage or something like that. You're going, well, what does it have to do? What do they have to do with each other? But there's certain common interests and concerns of the lender and of the parties that are involved in the transaction that translate over between the different types of transactions. And so when you can start understanding and seeing that big picture, then everything gets a lot easier.
Right.
And then you also just need to have a broad general knowledge of what the rest of the firm does. You need to understand litigation. You need to understand what the process is. If, for instance, on our team, Kyle needed to know, okay, well, if our borrower defaults, what happens?
Right.
How do the provisions in our loan documents impact litigation, and what does that actually mean?
How does it actually end up getting enforced? What will a judge say? And then long term, how will it affect our client? And that's the stuff that a lot of times in transactions you forget. You're kind of focused on getting the deal done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're on this, we've got a lot of great questions from various team members and also some clients that you work closely with and have worked with you for years now. A lot of these are industry related. I actually want to touch on some internal questions first. So this is usually we just get questions, but I have a long kind of preface, and this comes from Melissa Martorella, our partner, who I also interviewed for the show last season. So I'm going to read it. These are Melissa's words, not mine. All right. So I'm not as well spoken as she is. Dennis is a strong leader and support for our team, the banking and finance team. He has experience and knowledge no one else has, and is willing to convey that information to others on the team. He's also one of the most caring people I've had the pleasure of working with, as he truly enjoys his practice and the people he works with. As the primary trainer on the team, he's also able to push the same feelings great parents use when they're teaching their children, but also has the uncanny ability to make you feel ashamed that you let him down. As a result, he's able to continuously grow our team's knowledge base and nurtures our young attorneys to become great assets. So my question for Dennis would be, and this is Melissa's question for you. How do you determine how others learn best to hold them each individually accountable for their personal growth? That's a good question. I mean, a lot of our people have to train people, and a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs and executives and principals, and they gotta deal with training. And training is the hardest thing. Oh yeah. I am terrible at it, and it drives me nuts because you have to customize. You can't just bark orders, So
but I think it's a combination of two things. One, honestly, is just patience, and understanding that. Well, if just because I'm pushing and trying to train them on something, and something that worked training, Lindsay, for instance, may not have worked when I was training Kyle, and vice versa. And so having the patience to go, okay, it's maybe, in figuring out it's not them per se that there's some type of defect. It's I'm not figuring out what they need.
When does that click for you?
It's trial and error, man. Okay. And it really is, because usually
are you open about that with the counterparty. Like, as to say, you're training Lindsay, say, and there's kind of some friction. Like, do you say hey, I did this before, but it's clearly not working. Let's work on something else, or
I'm absolutely open to it, and sometimes I'm slow to ask, and sometimes it's a communication. It's a little bit of a two-way street. As far as understanding, because if people don't communicate that they need something from me, I may not know. And so even though like the product is coming out and it still looks good, but maybe they're like, actually, after I work with them, there's something they don't understand, and they're going to talk to one of their team members.
And how do you resolve that? Because that's a big question I've always had, and everyone has this challenge. Is like when you're training somebody, they're not as it's not cards are not all on the table. When you're talking and training with them, and you're trying to teach them something, and they're trying to learn, and it becomes kind of a uphill climb because, well, if you had asked me, we would have gone through this problem together. And so from a trainer's standpoint, from a manager's standpoint, that can be a very challenging issue to overcome. So what do you do in that standpoint?
It's sometimes I beg and plead.
I like it. But honestly, patience, willingness to beg and plead. I like it.
And usually, but unfortunately, it comes up where if I'm working on a project with somebody and I just see a mistake, and I'm like, what happened here? I'm like, I thought we talked about this. We went over it. You didn't have any questions. What happened here? And then you got to open the dialogue of, okay, well, what could I have done differently for you so you could have understood this? Moving forward, so we can avoid these types of things from happening again. What is it that you need? And then I adapt myself in my training of them to what they're going to be most responsive to. And then at that point, if they're not responsive, then it's their fault.
Well, there's only a certain limit. But you can't bend over backwards. Literally, I mean, it's hard to keep giving bad patients if they keep making the same mistake. So there has to be a level of accountability and the level of shame, as Melissa puts it. You have to instill some shame.
That's the grown-up Catholic.
But the interesting part about that is adapting. I don't know if we still. I think we still do. We do a lot of disc profiles here, and that kind of gives you some semblance of an idea, and then you have to build out that rapport with the person to figure it out. But the key kind of condition precedent for that is there has to be a two-way communication. And I sometimes find myself in a situation where it's like I'm talking to a brick wall. Like they're not like I get it, and then they screw it up, or I get it, and they don't answer any questions like that. we could have resolved this if you had asked the question,
Yeah.
right? And so, is that resolved through shame or by Dennis, or how do you go about that?
I think it's more guilt than shame.
Guilt,
But,
all right. Catholic guilt, Catholic shame.
I don't think that's more of the impetus than the problem solver. Right? I think it's kind of like, I don't know about you. When I was growing up, I was always like, I don't want to disappoint my parents.
Oh, and
I would rather been beat like 10 times and have my mom tell me like
the reason, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of people who are being trained that they worry that you're going to get mad at them. They worry it's a dumb question.
Yeah.
And so, like, I try my best to establish that there's literally no such thing as dumb questions right now, and I don't really have that approach. But still, sometimes it doesn't come across.
Dude, it's tough. Yeah, it's really tough, and it's almost reminding people, and when things come up where that happens, they're going, look, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm an intimidating guy. I don't feel like I'm a scary guy. But maybe to a young associate or law clerk or whatever, maybe it is.
And I think it's a product of law school too, because law schools teach them in the wrong way. Yeah. They don't teach them well. And I don't care if you're from Harvard or from UCLA or Irvine. I don't care. Like, they teach them the wrong way. They tell them, like, you don't talk to the partner, you don't bug them, you don't. And it's the opposite. You can't succeed.
Yeah. Here you have to ask questions, and we try and instill that from the time we start interviews, and especially doing the summer clerk program. Right. It's constantly our doors open, ask questions, no dumb questions. And just it's like a repeated track. And hopefully, I guess brainwashing them into going, okay, I need to ask questions and I need to go through this. But when people don't do it, it's very difficult. And then you have to find the right opportunities to bring it up and be like, hey, look, I thought you said you understood this, or how are we going to, what do you propose to fix this? How, we need to make sure that we have an understanding here. Right. And, I have an expectation, and here are my expectations of you. Right. Because I also, it's unfair for me to have an expectation on them if it's not conveyed. Right. And I'd say, what are your expectations for me? What can I do, and what do you feel I should be doing for you? And then I leave it pretty organic, and it's it's like, look, I'm here for you. Whatever you need. You want me to sit on phone calls with you? I'll sit on phone calls with you. What is going to be the thing that gets you to where I need you to be? Right. Okay. And
so there's that level of accommodation. Like, you're asking them to communicate, but you're also going to accommodate to their needs and being trained.
Yeah, with a reason.
Of course.
But yeah, it's
you're not picking up the laundry. But I mean, yeah. Cool. All right, so let's get into some of these questions from our clients now, because these are some really good, and they're technical, which is very good. So this first question comes from Warren Silverberg at SDC Capital. Shout out to Warren. Thank you very much for the question, Warren. What is the most serious error lenders have made in documenting their transactions? And it can be based on real world experience, or just like theoretically.
The most serious error.
For me, it's not using Gerasi.
Oddly enough, it's not getting proper representation and not understanding the documents that they're using, right? Especially if they aren't using somebody.
Fannie Freddie docs just don't cut it.
Well, there's some that are worse out there. Yeah. I won't name names, but I've seen situations of where the clients come and it doesn't identify when payments are due, or the note doesn't show the rate. I'm going,
this loan is for free.
Yeah, pretty much, and you never have to pay it back. Right. But I think that's really probably the biggest mistake that clients.
They think that they can go forward with like a 2-page, California Realtors version of a form promissory note, basically, right?
Yeah, and some of them, sometimes it is sufficient, but they have to understand what the basics are to actually make it enforceable. Mm-hmm. Because I've also seen deeds of trust or mortgages that don't give them the ability to foreclose.
Oh, wow. So the point of the document is to allow you to foreclose on your collateral. Yeah. What does it say that you do your document?
There's been some wild stuff that's really come out.
Well, let's get into that. So, real life examples. Like, what was the worst one? Like, was it that? Is that you literally could not foreclose?
Oh yeah, that was probably the absolute worst one.
So you saw a deed of trust that said, like, it didn't talk about foreclosure rights, or you cannot foreclose?
It was. to be more specific, it was actually a mortgage. And there's certain states where you have to give the power of sale within the mortgage,
Right.
and it won't. And it identified the property. It said it was pledged, that it was being, offered as granted as mortgage to the lender, and then nothing.
No right of sale.
No events of default, no remedies. It was just, and it wasn't even, there's, I don't know if you've seen like the short form deeds of trust where it refers to like a recorded document that has all those terms in it.
Right.
But it's still, maybe on its face you don't see it, but it refers you somewhere else. But these ones just had nothing. I'm going, how are you going to realize on this collateral?
Right.
Is it just going to happen magically?
So it's cutting corners, but cutting corners in the most fundamental of ways. Like there are certain things you just cannot bypass.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not. It really comes from a lack of understanding, and it's from a legal standpoint because people know their business, right? But when it comes to the legal side of and enforcing what needs to be done in the business, until you've actually walked through it, I could sometimes I think it can be a pretty intimidating and kind of a mysterious. A mysterious thing. And, and kind of to give you an example, I know Nima, when he had was in here and did the cast with you, he had mentioned he didn't know what a deed of trust was.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of that
you should know these things.
And you figure you have somebody that went to law school and this is kind of what his livelihood is going to be, didn't know. Right. And I think a lot of people, and you have a lot of trust in the things that are being given to you, but if you don't read and understand everything that's in it, then you may be missing something.
Right.
And that's why I love it when our clients take the time to read our 120-page doc set or whatever it might be in that instance. I love it when they read it from cover to end, because it shows that they're taking the time to understand what's going on. And I always give time to answer those questions because it's important to me, because I feel like how are they going to make an informed decision and understand what their rights are and what they can do if they don't know what's in the documents.
Well, thankfully, there's been a lot of standardization and commoditization in the space where, with Wall Street coming on board, where they're not going to accept the garbage kind of documentation anymore. And there's been some, standardization to that. But even then, I think the floor, what they'll accept, is pretty thin, and that may not necessarily protect the person. So I guess let's go back to my point. You're not using Gerasi. So another question here from Catherine at Builders Capital. Shout out to Catherine. You're the best. Catherine. She asks a question: what states are the hardest to lend in from a private lender standpoint?
Tennessee.
Interesting. Not commonly chosen. I know why, but not commonly chosen. Why?
Because their usury laws are just ridiculous.
It's like prime plus, right?
Like 3, or so. I think right now, I think usury is anything over like 6 or 7%.
Right.
And and honestly, in the private lending industry, nobody does that.
Right.
And maybe a bank could fit that, but those usury laws aren't really. The banks are typically exempt from them anyway.
There is a way around that. So give Dennis a call.
There you go. We can address that. Another state that's difficult is actually, especially from a licensing perspective of trying to go into another state without a license, is Nevada. Nevada has has gone through multiple iterations of what they've allowed.
Yeah, they just changed their laws.
Yeah. Back in the day when I started, you used to be able to just send a letter to the Department of D in Nevada. I can't remember.
Financial institution. Yeah.
And so you could send in a letter saying, we don't have an office here. We don't solicit your borrowers. And there was like 3 of them. And it's like, if you don't do these 3 things,
we don't care.
They would send you a letter saying you're fine, you're cool, and it would. I think
this is pre-Dodd-Frank, pre-crash.
Pre-Dodd-Frank, pre-crash. Yeah. I remember. I feel like I faxed it and got a fax letter back. It was. It was a matter. It wasn't like some draconian process where
they have
took
a
like 3
similar
months.
exemption, but it's the most complicated thing you've ever seen in your life, and they want you to violate the interstate commerce clause, basically. And it's the most. I don't understand it, but okay. So back then it was that easy. Now,
now it's a nightmare. And trying to figure out that when we read the codes, they're not. They have sections that are kind of contradictory.
Kind of. Jeez, man. And what's funny is the local operators. A lot of them don't follow the rules and they get away with it because they're local operators.
Right. Yeah, and then the thing is, and I understand, kind of Nevada was it was a state level of model of like the Inland Empire. There was like this giant boom, tons of building, everybody was coming in and bringing money. But as soon as the crash happened, then property values plummeted.
Yeah, they got hit hard.
And so, you had empty houses, you had half-finished projects, tons of foreclosures, and that doesn't work well for any economy.
Right.
And so just unlike this county of San Bernardino, who can't really enact their own laws to make it more difficult for somebody to lend in San Bernardino.
Right.
The state of Nevada just had this crazy knee-jerk reaction. And went from go ahead and fax us a letter saying that you don't do these three things, and we'll send you something back like right away. Yeah. To where they're at right now of pretty much it's if you are any type of established lender and you want to make loans in their state, you need to have a license.
And they've gone so far, at least the way we read the code, it's not just any established. I mean, even investors who do this as a kind of a hobby. Yeah. You need to be licensed there. There's no wholesale exemption. But what's the funniest thing is, like, if you've been, for the guys who've been set up there for 10 years now, I know for a fact that they don't necessarily stick to all the rules, and they somehow get through all of it. I think the Nevada regulator likes to pick and choose who they go after, and it's unfortunate because the market is growing significantly, and it's really hard to lend in the state.
Yeah,
so.
And there are exemptions, but it's really they're very narrowly tailored. Right. And it's definitely fact driven, and it's what applies for a lender in one instance. Yeah, you change one small little thing the next time, and it totally doesn't apply.
How about the best state?
The best state? Oh gosh, there are a lot of those.
Okay, give me your top three. Give me your top three.
Because you're pretty much looking at any state that really doesn't have no usury limitations and no licensing requirements. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot that are like that.
Texas.
The majority.
Texas, I really like Texas.
Texas is good as long as you're staying away from residential.
Right. The homestead
because they have their homestead.
Yeah. But you can foreclose in 30 days.
Yeah.
So that's just, every time I was in Texas for these, I did record it through there, and they made me jealous. Like, you can go after a property in 30 days in Texas, and that's slow. Like, we can go faster if we wanted to. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But besides that, how about there? How else?
Illinois is good.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting, Oklahoma. It's funny. It's like
and what's interesting now is the market is expanding into these states. No one used to lend in these states. I mean, Illinois was basically just Chicagoland, handful of lenders who operate in Chicagoland. I mean, Renovo, shout out to Kevin, who did an episode with us. He was telling me, like, they dominate, most of Chicagoland, but the rest of the state isn't a priority. They're growing now, but these states weren't, looked at back in 2016. Now. You're seeing deals in Oklahoma. You're seeing deals in Illinois.
Yeah, we have them. Yep. Ohio is another pretty good one.
Yeah.
Michigan.
But these are judicial states, though, right? So from a foreclosure standpoint.
From a foreclosure standpoint, they're not great. But they also have, like Ohio has, you can actually pledge a judgment. So, it isn't, you don't get a judgment to foreclose, but you get a money judgment, and you can really start turning the screws, and it does speed up the process overall if you're able to do it. There's specific requirements that are involved with being able to do that, but it definitely puts a kind of a nice feather in the cap or a quiver in the arrow for lenders in trying to convince borrowers that they either need to perform or maybe even take some type of alternative action with respect to maybe like a deed in lieu or something, just because they don't want to have that judgment out there. They don't want to because
they have that in the other judicial states, man. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Well, here's another question from Paul Cotter at Socotra Capital, one of our oldest clients, and Paul actually volunteered. I gotta ask these questions. Though. I asked Adam and Tony, and Paul was like, "No, I gotta ask." So, Dennis, besides credit reports, what tools and services would you use to check on a borrower's background?
So it's gonna depend, I guess. If they're an individual borrower, you're kind of limited in what you're looking at, and credit report's going to really tell you a lot of what you're doing, but. If you're expanding into some, and if it's a smaller loan, I wouldn't really go necessarily beyond that. Mm-hmm. But if you're making, something of a more substantial value and where you're actually really underwriting the borrower, and it's not asset based. It's going to be borrower based. It's going to be where you're looking at it. It's an income producing property, for instance, and you want to make sure that this guy isn't shady, not going to pocket your money and not pay your loan, forcing you to have to take some type of action. Background checks can be helpful, but I don't necessarily think you have to do it in 100% of your transactions. I think it's really...
That can be cost prohibitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's transaction appropriate. And obviously if you're dealing with like foreign nationals, you have to make sure you perform your due diligence to look back at that as well.
Are there any tools? Because he's asking, I also asked about like Westlaw People Map or like Lexis's version, or is there any kind of tool that you recommend?
That from an industry standpoint, and especially if you're looking at going to Wall Street with your loans and anything, Lexis is really what's recognized as kind of the standard.
Good to know.
And so, if you deviate from that, you tend to run into more trouble. I'd done it for a client. We didn't have Lexis at the time, and I was like, look, here's what we have, and then I ended up working with the bank that they're the rehab lender, and kind of worked with them as far as what they would find acceptable. And so I had to go through and I had to show like all the data. I put together this big declaration saying these are the databases that Westlaw relies on, and I swear that this is all the stuff I went through.
Wow.
And here's what I found. Yeah, and it was a
so they
kind
prefer Lexis.
Absolutely, and there isn't necessarily anything. It's easier to read, I think.
It's what they're used to, right? Check the box.
That's what they're used to. Yeah. And it is, and anyone dealing with Wall Street knows that sometimes it's more of a this is what's always been done than a this is what's actually makes the most sense.
But from a background check standpoint and a borrower culpability or bad borrower, kind of bad actor kind of situation, give us, you've seen all types of deals, right? And we've been around. You've been with us now almost 10 years, and we've seen the Harry deals, we've seen the turn and burn deals. Give us kind of an episode of like, what was a really bad actor kind of deal for you?
And actually this is one that snuck by, and this was actually a bad actor that effectively did what he needed to.
And he didn't get caught.
Not did what he needed to. He got caught eventually, but it took a long time. And it's the thing that I have noticed, and the thing that scares me the most when we're reviewing things. Documents for clients, and it's looking at the entity documents.
So he
hijacked the guy hijacked an LLC.
So give us a little more color. So what happened?
So we had a client of ours was making a loan that was secured by a couple different pieces of land that were free and clear in Newport. They were zone residential, and I think they actually had entitlements and stuff. So they were ready to just start building up. And this guy, went to our client and said, okay, yeah, I have these properties. Our client lent the money as part of our typical process. We asked for entity docs. He produced the articles of organization, which you can actually get just from the Secretary of State website. He produced an operating agreement, and he produced a statement of information, the most recent one that was filed with the Secretary of State. And we ended up lending him money, and because it was free and clear, there was a cash out on this. And what ended up happening was this dude hijacked the LLC. Somehow he was familiar with this LLC and the people that actually owned it, and owned this property that was free and clear. So he went in.
It's almost like kind of like deed fraud, almost like like
sort of, but it's even I think it's
corporate title fraud almost. So he had manufactured that he was the owner of the LLC.
Yeah, what he did is he filed an amended, a new statement of information, identifying himself as the president, CEO, manager of the LLC, and produced an operating agreement, backdated it, which is, I'll tell you one thing. If people, when they commit fraud, a lot of times you'll see they'll date it currently, and they're like, oh, this is the operating agreement that's been around all the time. But then when you look at the articles of organization, it's like 7 years ago.
Right.
You go, why is this date? What's the difference between 7 years?
What happened during those 7 years?
Yeah. Is this the original one? Right. Is this and so the people don't think about that. But this guy had everything together. We performed our due diligence. The client performed their due diligence, and there was nothing that we had brought to us that would indicate that this guy was anything other
How
than
did he get
legit.
caught?
The owners went, I think, to try and sell the property or
and discover the
actually
lien
build
against it.
and discover the lien. Yeah, and you know, it was a headache for our client. You know, title kicked in, and title defended, but you know, it's still, you know, those are rough things. It shows that sometimes you can do and perform all your due diligence.
You can do everything right.
But there's still an element of risk involved in anything that you do.
Right.
And that's not to try and scare anybody from doing anything, but I think it's also with the idea of understanding this is what you do. You know, there's a reward and a benefit you get out of this, but this is why also you need to make sure that it's important to cross your T's and dot your I's, because even in situations where you do everything perfectly, there still can be an issue.
Right. I've heard of people like hacking the recording system and taking title to your home and stuff like that, or taking like getting access to your home title. And you know, you hear about vendors that protect that, but for corporations and LLCs, you can't really stop them from doing that unless you're watching.
Yeah,
you got to pay attention. And thankfully, at least in California and in most states, it's public record now. You can pull that. Search your own entity name. You can see it right there. Yeah. But like, you know, I personally have a couple of corporations. I check that once every other month, just because after I heard about this a few years ago, I'm like, that's so scary, and it's so easy. You just go online and search it.
Yeah, it's
you can see
super
anything
easy.
that's been filed. And if I know I didn't file that, that's not my signature. You know, that's pretty easy. You know, so. Yeah. Okay. So another question we get a lot, and actually this is more of a question in general I wanted to include, was like, what? Okay, so we're right now, the private lending industry, both residential and commercial, is on fire. I mean, we are seeing mass standardization, mass commoditization of capital. There's unlimited capital right now at very, very low cost of capital. What do you think is the biggest challenge this industry is going to face going forward? Because we kind of had a little bit of like a holy crap moment last year during COVID, but I mean, over the next few years, we're about to head into, you know, we're 10 years past, well over 10 years into this cycle, and we're going into, I think, year 13 now. What do you think?
You know, I think that, you know, there's a couple different things that I think that kind of concern me, or that I think that we need to make sure we're, you know, the industry as a whole is careful of as we move forward. One concern is just, you know, you had mentioned there's you know, a lot of capital available, which is good because it provides, you know, there's competition, which from an investor standpoint, and if you're running a fund, not the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of consumers and really keeping an industry on the right track, that competition is healthy. Yeah. And that's what really helps to regulate where it's going and to make sure that we don't make the mistakes that we did in the past. That being said, going off of that, the fear I have is, let's say there is a lot of building that occurs. Where capital is still going to be easily deployed. What's going to happen is because if things continue, all of a sudden start moving really fast, and people want to deploy money, the tendency is you start lowering your standards, and what's
Race
required.
The bottom.
Yeah. And that's, you know, and that's what happened, you know, when, you know, back in 2004, 2005.
No doc, no income. I'm starting to see those these days. No docs, no statements, nothing. Right? I mean, I'm starting to see it. So,
and you know, and I work a lot more with credit guys than necessarily the sales guys on the side, but that's the thing that scares me. I know that everybody wants to drive sales, but from a credit standpoint, it's terrifying. You know, I think that really the lenders and the clients that I worked with back then, and the clients that we have now, the ones that did really well and were able to survive through from like 2005 until things really, you know, the private lending industry rebounded a little bit earlier because their capital was needed. They really bailed out the economy. I think you guys did a great job and did a service to us.
Right.
But until that, you know, and I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. It's okay. But
that's what happens.
We're talking about race to the bottom, though.
Yeah.
You're starting to see a little bit of that. Right? You're starting to see a lot more aggressive credit guidelines. Yeah. Now, some folks have, you know, COVID was a good kind of like gut check a little bit. A lot of guys tightened up a little bit. Yeah. They said, okay, we're going to start asking for credit. We're going to start, you know, reducing our credit risk. We're going to start changing our geographies a little bit. We don't know those MSAs. We're going to pull out of them. But now we're about, I think that loosened up. I think things started loosening in August.
Yeah.
Now we're in August again. It's a year later, and a little more than a year later. And, I'm seeing the same pattern.
Yeah. And it's going to get.
And the investors are okay with it. The institutions are okay with it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a little frightening because it's all the same greed cycle of what drove it. And it was, it's easy to forgive things and overlook things when it doesn't seem like anything's going wrong. And there's no, even if things went sideways, you're like, I have plenty of equity in this property. I'll just foreclose. Who cares?
Sure.
But then, at some point in time, it only can grow like that for so long.
Right, and going back to season one, of the very first episode we did of the show, when Steve Pollock said, he saw it twice. He said, when values continue to climb record numbers for too many years, we got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're seeing that right now.
Yeah, and that's combined with very low interest rates.
Right.
And they just lowered them again.
That's just gasoline on the fire.
It's. And then we're going to, and I don't know when this has happened, but I anticipate is that all these foreclosure moratoriums, once that gets lifted and you're able to, banks are able to start moving forward with foreclosures again, especially on the GSE products.
Yeah.
When landlords are able to start evicting tenants, when all those restrictions get lifted off, we're going to see there's going to be a lot more inventory.
I hope so. I hope so. But my concern is that Blackstone's going to buy them all up. Just gobble them all up, right? You've got that giant mandate.
Yeah.
So it's
really going to be difficult to, depending on how that goes, because, what happened, the combination of what helps drive prices up is if people start refinancing and they start going, oh, hey, I have all this value in my real property, not realizing, look, the value of your property, you should treat it as, okay, it's what it is. If I were to sell it today, that's really what I'm going to get out of it, and not with the idea of I'm going to continue to pull out of it, and especially to buy consumable goods, right?
Right.
If you were going to take money out to invest it in your business or to do something like that, absolutely, because interest rates are so low right now, your return on money is going to be awesome.
On the consumer side, you're starting to see significant risk being taken because CFPB relaxed their guidelines a few years ago. The non-QM market is, I feel like non-QM today is close to where subprime was, but they have the ATR obligation, so it's a little bit less risky. But the other day, I was streaming through LinkedIn, and I saw a HELOC credit card. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. They're back. They're back. Remember the HELOCs?
Yes.
They're back. And so that's interesting to me. It's like, oh, we're starting to see this similar patterns, right? But with a different market conditions, because rates were not this low back then.
Oh, no, not even close.
Right. So it's interesting to see where we're going to head. I mean, let's talk about commercial real quick, because you do a lot of work on the commercial side. And you and I have talked about this about 3 or 4 years ago, where we see the next recession coming. And I thought it was going to be another like 70s Carter era kind of recession. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but gas is really expensive right now. So, but where do you see it? Is there risk in commercial right now? Because COVID kind of hit it pretty hard, but it's making a comeback.
Commercial, depending on the sector that you're in, you could. There's a certain discrepancy, like pretty wide discrepancy, I think, in certain areas, and I think areas that are presenting a greater risk.
But our clients who are doing the bridge stuff, right? I mean,
the bridge stuff, I think, if you're not in it for a long haul, I don't see anybody necessarily in the next like 1 to 2 years. If you're making 12 to 24 month loans, especially, you're probably going to be out of it before anything substantial really were to happen. But when you're underwriting it, you definitely need to take it into account, and don't, again, in certain industries, don't get super aggressive on your valuation of the properties.
And that's or some types of retail are struggling, right?
Absolutely, because between the stay at home and work from home, and a lot of big companies are moving towards that direction, and people are seeing it still works.
What are you seeing? What are you seeing from a trend standpoint on that side? Because in resi, in the private lending industry, we're seeing a pretty consistent direct heading towards commoditization and the trend toward Wall Street. But on the commercial side, that's always been available to them. The asset class has changed. The appetite has changed, hasn't it? I mean, so talk about that real quick.
And right now I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that. Honestly, it's
the smattering. You're starting to see.
It's still. I haven't been able to fully get something going. Like, this is definitely where I see them going. And
you're a resident cannabis expert. Cannabis is still doing just fine, right?
Yeah, cannabis is fine, and it will do fine for quite some time. Where we're going to end up seeing the big event for the cannabis industry is going to be when it becomes legal nationally.
Right, we're almost there.
And as soon as that happens, I think probably within the next 2 years.
Right. But that drives industrial, that drives agricultural raw land, right? So those types of asset classes seem to be doing just fine. Industrial seems to be on fire.
Oh, you figure industrial between you have cannabis and then you also have just warehouses and other things because everything's shipping.
E-commerce.
Amazon's, e-commerce is huge. So you have to have that space. Yeah. And so it's just blown up, which, like you had mentioned before, you also see on the other end of it, retail is really suffering.
So we're not getting as much. So just from what we're seeing as an organization, we're not seeing as much what we used to on the retail.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, and usually if they are coming in, it's kind of in well established areas that aren't necessarily, Basically I was seeing a lot more big box, where it's like they had a big box store like
a bank loan.
Yeah,
and a lot of bank would do.
Yeah, and even just with clients that owned, that were making loans to like an individual that owned a strip mall or whatever, that wasn't necessarily a bank loan. They were, private lenders. They had maybe like a retailer, like a larger retailer that was in there. And because so many of them are closing and because they're not doing well, the draw of those stores now, everything else around it's suffering. And so, there's definitely a trend away from it. I think a lot of it is they're repurposing a lot of things, and I think probably what I have been seeing a little bit more is going mixed use again with residential and retail together, because that
apartments over storefronts,
or even just within the same really close vicinity, and so it's not true mixed use, but there's a combined use, I suppose would be the right way to put it, where they're really driving it, providing certain level of service and products to the individuals that have.
Yeah, we have a couple developments near where I live. It's kind of part of the master plan. Like you got this massive master plan residential community, and as part of it, you got a Whole Foods, a series of restaurants, a couple bars. Like it's all part of it. Yeah, and that seems to be the play these days, as opposed to like a strip mall, or as opposed to a shopping center. And it makes me wonder where that's going to head. It hasn't picked back up from a transactional standpoint for us. I mean, we haven't seen as much volume as we used to.
Yeah, not surprising. Yeah, and then even on the same end on that is with respect to office space.
Oh yeah,
but even before, especially it depends on region, but especially in Southern California, we had a glut of office space anyway.
Yeah. There's certain they're building more. Irvine Company's building more right here. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, you drive by and you see they're putting up brand new office buildings right next to buildings that have been there that are a little bit older, but they're probably 30% occupied.
Right.
And you're going, why are you building right next to this?
Who knows?
when they're barely, they're not even pulling enough rent to pay their mortgage.
You can't convert office to residential that easily. I mean, I was seeing a lot of hotel to residential conversions, but I wasn't. You can't really convert office. Office is kind of set in place. You can't turn it into industrial. It's a tower. Yeah. So it's an interesting time to be when it comes to office. All right. Well, I want to close with a fun question because we got one fun question. Thank you very much, Shauna. I was hoping that other folks would give us some more fun questions, but we got one fun question from Shauna Phelan at SDC Capital. If Dennis could be any Marvel superhero, which one would he be?
Any Marvel superhero?
Any Marvel in the entire Marvel universe, not the MCU, because the MCU is very narrow. So.
Oh boy. Interestingly, I probably would still stick in the MCU.
Okay.
Gosh.
You're on the spot.
That's
You're on the spot.
Yeah.
You got to do it.
It's on the spot.
You got to pick one.
And I can only pick one. Oh, gosh. I think it probably would be, I'm debating right now, going through my mind. I think it would probably be between Doctor Strange.
Okay.
Just because of the whole manipulation of time and all that other stuff would be, I think I'd have a lot of fun with that.
I need more time. Oh yeah. Oh man. I can use that.
And mess with people,
Make them repeat themselves over and over again.
You're just moving stuff around. Right. They're like, wait, what happened here? Yeah,
the refillable beer with Thor, that was pretty cool. Yeah. I could use that. Yeah.
That or Captain America. I just always loved Captain America since I was a little kid.
Always good. Always a good choice. Always solid choice. New Captain America now, right? I was watching the
Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Falcon and Winter Soldier. Yeah. Now he's Captain America, right? So there you go. All right. Well, you know what? I think that's all we have today for this episode. Thank you, Dennis, for
thank you
joining
for having me,
us.
Kevin.
And this was a really good episode. We have fun here. And look out for more live content from us here at Leonard Lounge with Kevin Kim. And look out for some swag coming your way. We're coming out with hats. If you want one, order one, let us know. This is Kevin Kim for Leonard Lounge with Kevin Kim signing off. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to Leonard Lounge with Kevin Kim. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did enjoy, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform. And be sure to follow our show to be notified of new episodes. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe for more content from all of us here at Gerasi. Leonard Lounge with Kevin Kim is available on all podcast platforms. Referrals really help us spread the word, so please send this over to someone you think might enjoy it. See you next time. This is Kevin Kim, signing off.